Donald Trump's police state grows, this time targeting mentally ill and the homeless. Welcome to Law and Society. Please subscribe. This is another warning, another police state overreach. So Donald Trump yesterday, in the quiet of night, published an executive order saying ending crime and disorder on America's streets. Mind you, the federal government has very limited law enforcement responsibility when it comes to on a state level, on a local level. In order for the federal government to seize you and confine you, they need probable cause that there has been a crime that has been committed. You are to be given due process of law by the Fifth Amendment. If you are causing criminal confinement and criminal charges, there's a right to counsel under the Sixth Amendment. You have a right under the Eighth Amendment not to be subjected to cruel and unusual punishment. And imprisonment without due process of law is cruel and unusual punishment in my book. And under the 14th Amendment, Amendment's Equal Protection Clause, you are owed due process under the 4th and 5th and 6th Amendments, whatever individual rights that you have, and those rights cannot be circumscribed without probable cause that there is a criminal activity afoot. Despite that layer, despite that protection that the Constitution provides and limits our federal government from encroaching into private property, private personal autonomy, we are seeing an erosion of that under Donald Trump's rule. You know, his most dangerous executive orders, I believe, are his police state orders. And they are published when there are flashy stories. You know, he did it in April 28, and he's doing it now, under the cover of stories like the tariff chaos and the anti-woke AI, Epstein, big, beautiful bill. Then today, George Santos went to prison. So every day there's a new scandal coming out, and people and the media are, they gravitate towards that and just briefly talk about the executive orders. Well, the executive orders of the police state, two of which were published on April 28th, and one that was published on July 24th. These three orders attack the personal autonomy of people living in the United States and goes beyond the due process of law. So in this particular order, and I'm going to read you parts of the order, this particular order focuses on homeless people and people who are mentally ill and talks about involuntary confinement of these people, which is violation of your Fourth Amendment rights, violation of your Fifth Amendment rights, I think violation of your Eighth and 14th Amendment rights, and they are not provided due process of law. There's nothing in this executive order that says they will be afforded due process of law. Now, let me read you portions of this order. The purpose and policy. Endemic vagrancy, disorderly behavior, sudden confrontations, and violent attacks have made our cities unsafe. Overwhelming majority of these individuals are addicted to drugs, have mental health condition, or both. Homeless individuals report having regularly used hard drugs like methamphetamines, cocaine, or opioids in their lifetimes. An equally large number of homeless individuals reported suffering from mental health conditions. All well and good, leaving our other citizens vulnerable to public safety threats. Mind you, we have been living in this world in America for 250 years with these protections. And, since the 1970s and 80s, the Fourth Amendment has been attacked. And so the state doesn't need probable cause to stop you anymore. Now they need a reasonable suspicion based on particularized facts and attendant circumstances, which is such a sort of ambiguous and unclear standard, which is lesser than probable cause, and that's what we're dealing with here. And on the basis of that eroded constitutional protection, you see what's coming here. Shifting homeless individuals into long-term institutional settings for humane treatment through the appropriate use of civil commitment to restore public order. So their approach to public safety is depriving people who are homeless and mentally ill with institutional commitment, while on the other hand, they're cutting Medicaid to the point and cutting mental health service hotlines and LGBT hotlines, and they're cutting off that support. And at the same time, they're saying that mentally ill people must be, under this executive order, institutionalized, and calling it civil commitment. And so you don't have the issue of the Sixth Amendment. But this order also goes and targets sex offenders, which is the one, I guess, good thing about this executive order, talking various policies of how to keep registered sex offenders away from children. The executive order is so overreaching and overbroad and just mind-boggling in its nature that anything that may be a good that comes out of this executive order is overwhelmed by the ill effects of it. This order is going to be executed by the Attorney General and the Secretary of Health and Human Services, which is Bobby Kennedy, to work on the reversal of state and federal judicial precedents, talking about termination and reversal of existing law by an executive order that impede the United States policy of encouraging commitment of individuals with mental illness. So this policy that the United States is adopting right now, the Attorney General is going to see if there are ways to, reverse or terminate any sort of protections that people have against involuntary confinement. To me, that is false imprisonment. To me, that is intentional infliction of emotional distress if that person is already mentally ill, and you know that. And I believe in that institutionalization, you have a cause of action of false imprisonment, of intentional emotional distress, of deprivation of rights. There are just, to me, it just seems like, wow. When I first read it, I was like, oh my God, wow. First, they're going after, the policy was immigration, so they have detention camps for that. Now they are thinking about confinement and detention camps for the mentally ill and homeless. That's another category that they're targeting. Who are they going to target next? Is it going to be people in the LGBT community? Is it going to be women who are in certain conditions? If they are pregnant, they have to be confined, and their children have to be wards of the state. Well, where do we go from here? It talks about providing assistance to state to implement of maximally flexible civil commitment, institutional treatment, and step-down treatment. Then there is fighting vagrancy on America's streets, where the Attorney General, Bobby Kennedy, and the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development and the Secretary of Transportation will enforce prohibitions on open illicit drug abuse, enforce prohibitions on urban camping and loitering, on urban squatting, and enforce, where necessary, adopt standards that address individuals who are a danger themselves or others and suffer from serious mental illness or substance abuse disorder, or who are living on the streets and cannot care for themselves, through assisted outpatient treatment or by moving them into treatment centers or other appropriate facilities via civil commitment and other available means. What other available means? What other appropriate facilities? That right there is talking about the private detention camps that we have seen propping up across the country, holding migrants, also wrangling U.S. Legal U.S. residents and American citizens in this large-scale executive order enforcement that encroaches into people's individual rights, into state authority, into local authority, into the statutory authority under which people live on a day-to-day basis. These laws are in place for a reason. The laws, the state laws and the federal laws that prohibit, for example, talking about the sex offenders, the 18 U.S.C. 4248 of civil commitment of sex offenders. Those laws already exist and they are to be enforced. But here, there's almost a militaristic weaponization of civil services to confine Americans and people living in the streets in America. So now talking about sex offenders, ensure homeless individuals are arrested if they fall under the sex offender statute, determine if they are sexually dangerous, and certified accordingly for civil commitment. Ensure availability of funds for encampment removal efforts in areas for which public safety is at risk. So even for sex offenders, after they have finished their sentence, they get their rights back as American citizens. To go after them is aggressive if they have not shown to commit any offenses, if they're following the rules of their parole, if they are out on probation or whatever it may be. I know the sex offender thing is heinous, and I believe that that's exactly the reason why Donald Trump put it in this executive order, to cover for what he's doing with targeting homeless and mentally ill people, who are apparently all drug dealers. So detainees with serious mental illnesses are not released into the public, even with the excuse of lack of forensic bed capacity at appropriate local, state, and federal jails or hospitals. It's talking about the sex offenders, but it makes you wonder, are they going to house mentally ill and homeless people in jails and prisons? Quite possibly, if they find that those are the housing facilities that are available, and then they may do detention facilities that are coming up. These private detention facilities are propping up, and they're going to keep propping up with the massive budget that ICE has been given. Require in-custody housing release plans, and to the maximum extent practicable, require individuals to comply. So it's talking about redirecting federal resources towards effective methods of addressing homelessness. The veneer is good, but the method of going about it is wrong, is an overreach. This could be sent out as a policy directive to the different states to work with the states together instead of this carte blanche executive order that mobilizes the federal enforcement branches to go in and infringe on people's rights. That is what's wrong. Ensure that discretionary funds do not fund programs that fail to achieve adequate outcomes. Provide technical assistance during and after civil commitment process. Ensure federal funds are used for reduce rather than promote homelessness by supporting comprehensive services for individuals with serious mental illnesses and substance abuse disorder, including crisis intervention services. Now, taking all of this responsibility on the federal government, that generally the federal government funds the states and the states then take on the responsibilities of maintaining order and doing these things. The AG will prioritize funding for expansion of drug courts and mental health courts. That's mind-boggling again. See, we already have an Article 3 branch of government that is the judiciary. The Article 3 branch of government is the federal judiciary that handles cases, whether that be civil or criminal, on the basis of individual rights and the Constitution and federal statutes and state statutes and local statutes. And these courts, federal courts, administer the federal statutes. There are state courts that deal with the state law. There are municipal courts that deal with municipal laws. And these courts are already placed in place, but Donald Trump is asking the AG to create drug courts and mental health courts in the executive branch, much like immigration courts, which is not an Article 3 court. They're enforcement courts of Article 2, and they don't have the powers of Article 3 judges to hear these cases of due process. And to be able to discount individual rights and say we'll just expand drug courts and mental health courts and completely bypass Article 3 courts where there's requirement of due process of law. What's the public policy? It's public safety. Well, you have to be more specific than that if you are going to go ahead and infringe on people's individual rights and expand your drug courts and mental health courts. You have to provide more than public safety and the general overarching public interest, because that public safety and that interest is already taken into consideration in all the laws that are currently enforced by states and local authorities. Increasing accountability and safety in America's homeless programs. Ending support for housing first policies that deprioritize accountability and fail to promote treatment, recovery, and self-sufficiency. So they want to undo programs that are already there rather than reform them. Recipients of federal housing, with respect to recipients of federal housing and homelessness assistance that operate drug injection sites for safe consumption sites. So there's targeting that as well to bring civil and criminal action against them and see whether such recipients are in violation of the terms of the programs pursuant to which they receive the funding and whether that funding should be freezed or not. So existing programs are being targeted while this overreaching executive order is put in place. And, there, again, talks about this part, revised regulations to allow where permissible federally funded programs to exclusively house women and children and to stop sex offenders who receive homelessness assistance through such programs from being housed with unrelated children. That is a good thing. but you have stuffed it into an executive order with all sorts of infringement of constitutional rights. Then later it comes to collecting health-related information and sharing that data with law enforcement in circumstances permitted by law to use collected health data. And I found that to be another invasion of our privacy, and this way of carrying out homeless assistance programs by the federal government becoming the arbiter of who is mentally ill, who is homeless, who is a danger to society, who is a danger to public society. The federal law enforcement forces are going to be taking care of that. And don't forget, this comes on the heels of the massive ICE budget that they have, creating detention centers, ballooning ICE personnel. So law enforcement from ICE will blow up and become Donald Trump's own personal enforcement army, where he's not going to need the state resources, where he's not even going to need the Marshal Service or DHS DHS itself alone through ICE is going to be able to implement these provisions. And so I wanted to come out and warn again that this is an overreaching executive order that targets homeless people and mentally ill and brings them into the umbrella of internment camps and concentration camps. And these are Americans. They're not talking about immigrants anymore. It's not immigration policy anymore. And because it is not immigration policy anymore, the president's authority in these domestic matters is far, far, far lower than his authority in immigration circumstances. So his case for civil commitment and confinement of mentally ill and homeless people is far more dangerous and a far greater overreach into American society than the immigrant-migrant public policy that he used in his April 28th executive orders. So remember the public policies that he's using and how he's getting from as specific as he could get with immigration, and then broadening out to other marginalized demographies in the country. It is a time for people to worry. It is a time for people to warn one another. And I implore people to pay attention. More and more people are paying attention to these executive orders, and more people have shared this executive order than I saw them share the April 28th ones. So I guess it's progress, but there's still a long way for us to go, and we need to raise our voices. With that said, thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe and share, and I'll talk to you soon.